not because it wasn't justified, but that she should receive reprimand in some capacity, and not occupationally either, nor should she have received of her employer any at all demerit, in that the coat warehouse, like all of America's now utterly rapacious retail sector, which stock quota has drained and depleted all decency from job description, as it has to all business, ubiquitous, incentivizes selfish, asocial behavior. So inspiring discontent by so requiring that management, to achieve its any bonus or better its plight at all, earn extra by denying subordinates enough, in shifts understaffed and hours withheld from the schedule, that underlings should forfeit vital income to save the company billed hours of staff on the clock, that corporate allots a location, let's say, 20,000 hours for the sake of convenience, 30,000, 40,000, however many, at the disposal of the general manager to disperse among the employee's schedule and throughout 52 weeks in 1 day worth of location operation. If said general manager over the course of a year should then scrimp and save and be deliberately stingy, understaffing here, sending a few home early, shaving hours there, scheduling Jerry Jock Itch 6 hours on Sunday instead of 8, Marcia on Monday until 1 instead of 3 p, and so on likewise over the week, throughout the year, and by the end of the allotment period should manage to save the company 2,000 hours of wages that it didn't have to pay out to its employees, then the general manager receives as bonus, among kudos and accolades, a percentage of the total sum of money that the company has ultimately saved or spared of spending through tight-fisted staffing and a premium placed on time employed. That sort of thing. Meanwhile, Jerry Jockitch has to find another shift somewhere a month, and Marcia has to give blood plasma, like me, to make up for lost hours, and that ends should still meet. And what's more, that places like the coat warehouse expect so much and give so little in return. They take so much more, the shine away from someone's eyes, and their hope, beyond the forfeiture of present time, that the coat warehouse ought never censure hatefulness in one of its managers, for as much as the coat warehouse gets managers to crack the whip on others, but makes them to first hate their own lives, that the task becomes easier. But the coat warehouse merely passed up the opportunity to have under its employ a super-duper person like me, is what it should have all boiled down to. So her reprimand shouldn't have been occupational either. But I meant cosmically, like karma, like what goes around comes around. And that it's not as though it were utterly unjustified, at least from my perspective, and on a personal level, as Fat Bat's bullshit that Wednesday morning was entirely unwarranted, but that served her by dispassionate fate, or some other stoic notion above our own. She should have encountered some brief misfortune as a result, like losing her new sunglasses, or stepping in a rain puddle, or rending, at inopportune, the albeit heroic, mythological, legendary strength of her perseverant screen door mesh. So that, on second thought, may impose too much price and expose too much peril on an unsuspecting public, and unto such breakdown and mayhem and carnage. But then, sometime ariseth a storm. Oh yes, there comes betime a storm, of such windswept wrath, but that, out from the chaos of calamity, tomorrow, like newborn hope. So, I guess who's to say what may, or tell but how as well. Still, for fuck's sake, I don't have an acquaintance or an amigo or an amicable association in all the world. And you don't care about me, and I don't care about you either, and wouldn't if we met, except you're a woman, and beyond just beautiful, which only means that I automatically merely lust you, while like is another matter, but that you're like me, only female, and so yet strive to be, or stay, extraordinary, and seek always to expand, and perpetually outshine the moot luster and the dim dross around us, to so keep us worthwhile. Beyond that, though, I don't like me either, the miserable son of a bitch, and I gotta live with me. But yet I'm gonna harbor a burning begrudge besides these tactless sludge I slime, but which, if I'm honest, I can forego or add to, and accept but unto your hungry humor, and let's face it, everybody's inner sophomore, they become more perfectly this awful character and this ugly thing I am. And only, I suppose yet, just this much else, that such poison prose proffers free field to foster favor for friendly appeal, and to go not to find foe with whom to feud. Yet I'll seek to avenge me some tired, overworked, underpaid single mother because she found my presence less than optimal, when my own mother regrets that they should have ever had need to snip her asshole to widen my way as she shat me out 31 years ago this very dreary day, and more so too beyond that, but I'm going to take satisfaction and relish it, how someone required it so dearly of her that she merely disliked and was once rude to me? Holy shit, and not bloody likely. I've learned to love contempt. Go ahead, compliment me with your hate. Tell me how happy you presume I ought be, and that so much you must envy, how comfortable I can only be in my own skin. And it's a shot in the arm and a boost of self-esteem to be deemed by others for the high notch which must down a peg be taken. I really must be something superior, and daunting magnificent too, that so many in me have slayed their giant, and proven themselves. That I too am but only human also, and just like them despite. And I said I would rather have you wise than adoring, but unto this avoided effect. For although it left her temporarily unemployed, and she bared its screaming pain, yet in her reproach I too am impacted. And it is no pax but pox, that any woman should be so dismally distressed whatsoever, though she has only yet her own actions to regret, but because she tangled, and not even with me, but around my blind premise, and with whatever this awful thing which precedes me, and makes a mess after. And so I felt terrible for Fat Bat, mortified, while I was there in the checkout line. Not because the thought of her chastisement seemed unreasonable, especially as she had been undeniably to an unreasonable degree chastised, and that her any reprimand regarding me should have been of such severity as equal to simply getting to enjoy no longer the presence of my shiny person, and nothing more than that. But because she shouldn't have bared any blame at all, as she had so hardly anything to do with my decision to quit. She merely hastened its abrupt action. I was done before I even clocked in that day, just as soon as they pulled the shit with the other one, the hot young Latina with whom I had briefly become acquainted, thoroughly convincing me thusly of my vindicated suspicion. My mind was made up. It was patently unnecessary, but I clocked in to save face, and so that the pretty disappointment didn't see that her coldness had so affected me. To be honest, though, after the first hour of the first day, she was the only motivation that had me still sticking around. The place was, and likely still is, a shithole. The back section, where the first half of the morning shift takes place, reeks of heavy cardboard scent, and the atmosphere is dim, ugly, and demoralizing. The day's first hours are spent handling and ripping and tearing through and breaking down cardboard boxes, and for $9 an hour, too, mind you, that by the time it's done your hands and clothes feel gritty like they've been rubbing newspaper all day, and the job is generally awful and dingy and deplorable, and pays $9 an hour, remind you. That yes, and of course, and therefore, once the prettiest and only beautiful co-worker and person of any intrigue to me proved herself compliant to their bullshit and compromised under their compel, I had only reason to leave. It was only a matter whether I would stick around until lunch. But the decision was made, so all these new chica at the register pretty much did me a favor, for I did not want to be there. These fucking hicks, though, they blamed Fat Bat, knowing full well that it was their goddamn fault, that they're a bunch of dimwit morons, that they lack all subtlety and tact, that they treated me like I was as big an ignoramus as they, that they thought I'd be sticking around to be antagonized and schemed around and harassed, and that their pea brains are about as big as their little hick dicks, which puny appendages too are as futile as they are infantile. And then I think, more than anything, is why I stood in the checkout line so dejectedly and despondent, somber grave, because that we both, she and I, were both helplessly at the will of these same blunt, brute numbskulls, that she and I too were suddenly kin by shared complaint, and I could instantly retain none at all of the resentment which I might prior as yet still have rightly harbored. For that this poor woman, Fatbat, which very pseudonym I hate even to very type, but do by now for mere convenience and to not confuse by another reference and further complicate this jumbled knot. But that Fatbat, this poor woman, she had been forced to grow up under the hands of these same monstrous emotional toddlers. These monsters with the emotional capacity of toddlers and the genitals. And by these same dastardly dullards was her socialization received and her tutelage portrayed. Wherefore, as swine provided her masculine example, we all really ought be impressed and happy for that she feeds not on her own refuse. But we all, as we all need be conscientious also of the, if not handicap, or even limitations, then certainly the challenges imposed culturally upon her, unto as much though that, while ultimately it was her who to me had originally and only done wrong, if one might even with designation so strong describe her dull allude that morning to only what dumb buoyant aloof, what ceaseless stupidity that I wear so unfailingly on my face, how so though she had been shitty to me, yet I conveyed apology, but because this unfortunate woman was raised by and subjugate unto these hideous heathens, these violent fascist Catholics, which shitty archers would bash the bow upon their horse's back and kick the quiver for the arrow that they misshoot, or, that is, more appropriately, would thrash the weed whacker upon the ground for the divot that digged in the yard when it was mishandled, and for its user's negligent duties in his career landscape, or that is more accurately, career grass cuttery, or career lawn trimmery. As landscaper could imply a more academic architecture, and thusly a more component expertise, which is utterly estranged from the masculine half of this regional alien. Foreign to this local foreigner, and hateful to the cognitively challenged male disposition of these ombre beige Caucasian creature. Even so, though, and wherefore, Fab-Tab, she had so little choice or hope or possible other option or outcome than to purify hateful, and could only become, and perfectly example, and resemble the mean, angry concept exactly of her father's culture, or in lieu of who, for which figure's absence, whether to have who into void comes via vacuum, or venue unto avuncular vulgarity, to wear what happens of Hermana's chaste hopes between hyenas. But more so still, as I paid for Baldy's off-brand items, I could only and stood but silent vexed for the villainy between us, and for the damage done to her. Like the morbid segment which I watched earlier on the news this morning, reporting on church pedophilia, made it only more apparent to me just what sort of ruthless, pitiless zoology I contend against. All told, only a few tense seconds were spent within our mutual scrutiny before I walked on and out, maybe without our speaking a single word. I might have asked for 2 5s, with the $10 cash back I had coming. Its encounter, though, has added such element to the lingering impression of the whole experience that since the morning at Aldi, I've given more speculation under the circumstances surrounding the coat warehouse than my any analysis theretofore. But even so, forasmuch as they clearly compelled the hot young Latina to abruptly abstain from having first inspired her to establish so unabashedly association with me, then also dispensed their distinct displeasure upon Fab Tab for her minuscule part she played in my quick departure, and regardless whether or not they deduced it that her role was auxiliary and altogether inconsequential to my determination, but that they were displeased whatsoever. All that I'm left to think, that is all that I can come up with, is that they plan to manufacture unto the outside world some hostile workplace, which I was to have supposedly created in retribution and tormenting to my pretty young coworker, yet unbeknownst to, or ever exhibited, or instigated, or materialized, or actuated by me within, that they should fabricate some other violent, petty, menacing, vengeful, vindictive, needle dictitude in my character, but which nefarious behavior was to be depicted in retaliation for her disinterest and my affections unrequited, to, in so doing though, foster blemish on my future Wikipedia page, and so detract from my social voice, both political and in prose, which articulate they heard so profuse with poignant, impassioned pulpit just days prior alone in my car. And that's the happier potential. The other, and more likely as far as I figure, is that they engineer the same hostile workplace, predicated upon my same jaded ego, complete with complaints forged and filed with HR, about which I'm never approached or interviewed or disciplined. And though she believes and has been made to think throughout that she's working with them and on the same team against me, the young and pretty Latina and my brief coworker, and so, in some small measure, I guess, incurring the calamity that she meant to help impose, yet notwithstanding one day she turns up heinously murdered just the same, and likely mutilated for spurned effect, and in her death, my life too forever to be ruined. For in all this clumsy clue, guess who conveniently should seem the likeliest suspect? But for many years I've been made to imagine such hideous schemes against me, and way well before ever this most recent mariachi motif became manifest, that the apprehension they've imposed upon me, which burn upon my brain, was as by firebrand branded. It has long since inhibited my every notion that the anxiety that my present oppressors inspired on that night of snowbound frostbite 6 years ago with winter, and this pervasive premonition of imminent peril, which I try not to, yet cannot help but prognosticate and project unto the possible, if not probable, fate of every prospective mate, and unto every potential partner's pain, it has arrested my every amorous pursuit, lest some poor girl be violated and brought to great harm by the actions of their hate, but because of my love. Yet which nonetheless, such fearful withdrawal, such prudent reserve, such ruined recluse, is exactly according to their purpose, to any pleasant prevent my presence in public, my general participation within society, and, most importantly, my promiscuous prowess, that I my own self admonish my desires, for their dangerous imposition and selfish, to expose upon some hopeful girl at her hazard, amidst such pretense as I am, underneath the place of the precarious pen, which profess puts harm in its way, and portends against the punishment of prophecy.